I'm the program educator here, but I'm also a local musician. I'm an oboist and an English hornist, and I play for the Kokomo Symphony, the Lafayette Symphony, Kokomo Park Band, Columbus Symphony, not to be confused with the Columbus Philharmonic. But I also teach at Bethel University, and if Goshen College has an oboe student, I teach there as well, and I teach in the Goshen schools. So if anybody's planning on going to the Goshen High School musical, I will be the oboe playing in it. But yeah, let's get started with Rubinstein because I have kind of a lot of material. So Arthur Rubinstein, this picture, first I want to say, I chose because I thought it was a special picture. This was a portrait done by a friend before World War I believe, and this portrait was thrown out in the trash in World War II. It's obviously of Rubinstein, but yeah, it was thrown out in the trash, and someone was kind enough to get it out of the trash and get it back to Mr. Rubinstein. And you can't find this picture on the internet. You only find it in the autobiography. Okay, so in a nutshell, he was a Polish-American virtuoso pianist. He was born on January 28th in 1887, and he died on December 20th, 1982. He was a child prodigy, and he was considered one of the most prolific pianists of the 20th century. Vladimir Horowitz was kind of the other name that floated around as the most prolific. And he did know Vladimir Horowitz. He met him later in life, and he was influential in his life in a certain way. He was fluent in 8 languages, and that aided his music career. He also was considered the best Chopin interpreter, and I believe that is because they were both Polish, living in a French world. And so, you know, classical music can get some of its ideas from, you know, the national or the normal idioms of language and art and folk music. So I think that general background lended itself well to him being such a good Chopin interpreter. He recorded virtually all of Chopin's works. And he also played in public for 8 decades. And he played on all 6 inhabited continents. And obviously I'm talking about him because he played this lovely piano here. This piano came from Boston, and it was his favorite practice piano when he was playing in Boston. So he was born in Lodz, Poland, as Arthur Rubinstein. That is the Polish way of saying his name, but when he was in English-speaking countries, he did want to be called by Arthur. He was born into a Jewish family, and his brother wanted to name him Arthur instead of Leo, which the family was going to name him. His brother was saying, no, we have to name him Arthur because one of the neighborhood boys was a really good violinist, and his name was Arthur, and he thought maybe my brother will be a great musician. He was the youngest of 7 children to Felicia Hayman and Isaac Rubinstein, and he considered himself very much an unwanted 7th child. His father owned a small textile factory, so they were weavers, and his father is where he got his well-known photographic memory that also aided him very well in his music career. He was obsessed with the piano from a very young age. He had a couple sisters who were taking piano lessons, and he was drawn to the piano, to be near it all the time, to be in the same room as it, you know, putting his ear up against it and listening to it and feeling the vibrations. So in that obsession, he demonstrated a lot of talent with the piano as well. They could tell that he had perfect pitch by the age of 2, and because he showed such an interest, I think an uncle wrote a letter to Joseph Joachim, who was a very extremely famous violinist who I know from my music history classes. So they went and traveled to Joachim, and Joachim basically tested him out on his ear, so he would play complicated chords, and then Rubinstein would name the notes back to him that he was playing without looking at the piano, and this is all at age 3 or 4. And he would also ask him, Joachim would play the theme to some classical piece at the time, and then he had Rubinstein play the rest of it for him, as well as some of the harmonies. So we always think of Mozart being a prodigy, but Rubinstein was as well. And so Joachim determined that, yes, he has a great musical future. He could be a very good musician, and he deemed that by the age of 4. So he told his parents, take him back home, don't do lessons yet. Wait till 6 years old. So he did have, some sort of childhood, but at 6 he began lessons in Lodz, his hometown. So, he started studying in Lodz at 6 with Adolf Prechner, and then he went to the Warsaw Conservatory at 8. And his first public concert appearance was in Lodz at 7 years old. And at 10, he moved to Berlin, and that is when Joachim was in charge of his education. So Joachim employed Heinrich Barth to be his piano teacher, and Rubinstein also took lessons from the local conservatory for theory. He took those lessons from Max Bruch and Robert Kahn. And Joachim also thought that languages were a very important asset for a concert pianist. So he was also taking English and French there. So Heinrich Barth, his teacher, his piano teacher, had a very interesting teacher lineage. We like to talk about this in the music world. So Barth's teacher, which was Rubinstein's teacher, Barth's teacher was Franz Liszt, and Liszt's teacher was Czerny. I think I'm saying that right. And Czerny's teacher was Beethoven. So his great-great-great-grandfather teacher was Beethoven. That's how we like to talk about it. So his relationship with Barth, he respected his teacher, but he clashed a lot with him because there were lots of pieces that Rubinstein wanted to learn, but Barth banned it. There are reasons why teachers do that. It was very frustrating for him. So, he was there for 6 years with Barth, and the relationship just kind of deteriorated slowly but surely. There was one time where he got so frustrated with his teacher that he just started yelling and screaming and ripped up music right in front of his teacher because he just wanted to play something and he wasn't allowed to. Rubinstein was a pretty lazy kid. He was a lazy pianist, and he admits this fully. This is not me saying this. He hated practicing, and he didn't do a lot of it for the first 40 years of his life. He told one story in his autobiography where he loved to read books. He loved literature. So he would go into a room with a piano, shut the door. Nobody could see what he was doing, but he would practice his left hand exercises while reading a book and eating cherries, I think. And then he would switch sides, practice the right hand, read a book, and eat. So nobody knew what he was doing. They thought he was practicing like he was supposed to. So Barth, I think they knew that, the first concert he had with Barth as his teacher, it was quite an interesting story. His teacher was telling him, all the things remember this, don't do that, all of the normal things that, you should be thinking about before you go into your first recital with your teacher. And he wasn't really paying attention. He didn't really care. As soon as he got on the concert stage and sat down at the piano, he forgot what he was supposed to play, like completely forgot. The only thing he could remember that it was in the key of A flat major. So what did he do? He didn't let on that he completely forgot. He sat down at the piano, composed a little melody in the key of A flat, developed it, modulated to a different key, and then ended it, and they loved it. The audience loved it. They didn't know what it was supposed to sound like. They loved it, and his teacher was the only person who knew what had happened and what he did. And I think his teacher said something to the effect of, never in 1,000 years would I be able to do that. So that's the fake it till you make it story. So that was at 12. At 13, he had his debut with the Berlin Philharmonic. He played Mozart, K48, Schumann, Chopin, and Saison. One of his friends that he met in Berlin was Frederick Harman, and this, was a boy his age. They were both musicians, and I think Frederick did more composing than playing, but he really inspired Rubinstein on the subject of Chopin. Rubinstein said that Frederick wasn't necessarily like a great pianist, but when he played Chopin, he played it really well. He played it very Polish, as he said, and that was really inspiring for him to hear. So, being in Berlin, he had all these concerts he could go to, because going and seeing music and hearing music that you're not playing is also very important as a musician. He got to play for Grieg and Mascagni. Grieg was a famous Norwegian composer, which I have gone through my obsession with because my dad is Norwegian. But he got to play for Grieg. And Mascagni, he remembered Mascagni bursting into tears when Rubinstein was playing. And he saw Grieg wiping his eyes as well. So I personally had to pause for a minute to realize that the person who played this piano had met Grieg. So his early career. He left Barth in 1903 at approximately the age of 16 or 17. And he lived in Warsaw for a while with Frederick Harman's family. And in Warsaw, he met Paul Kochanski and Karol Szymanowski. And they were very good friends for decades. Paul Kochanski was a violinist, and Karol Szymanowski was a composer and a pianist, I believe. So in this time period where he left Barth, he studied music that he wanted to. He moved to Paris at 17, and he auditioned in 1904 for Paul Dukas and Jacques Thibault and Ravel to receive a contract with an impresario named Gabriel Astruc. So that led his career, that started his career. So the impresario would be in charge of making concerts, funding concerts. He had many of those figures in all over the world. So he played in several European cities, but he did have lots of financial difficulties. Part of that being him, part of that being not making a lot of money because he was unknown. When you spend a lot of time with aristocracy or people who have money, you develop those types of tastes. So he wasn't always great at spending his money wisely, which he was free to admit. So his early career concerts. The picture on the left, I'm going to say one thing actually. This picture is of him in his American debut in 1906. So his early concerts, he played in Warsaw, Poland in 1902 with the Warsaw Philharmonic, directed by Emil Młynarski, who turned out, so he was 12, I believe, yeah. Emil Młynarski turned out to be his father-in-law 35 years later. So yeah, debut at the Berlin Phil in 1903, Paris debut in 1904, American debut in 1906, Vienna debut in 1909, Rome debut in 1910, London debut in 1912. We're going to go back to that special prize. So he found out 2 weeks before it happened that there was Anton Rubinstein piano competition in St. Petersburg, Russia. And some of his friends said, you should do this. He didn't know all of the music, if any, and he learned it in 2 weeks. Piano competitions, you take months at least to learn the music. And he won second prize. There was a lot of political issues around whether he should be there because there were a lot of political issues with Russia and Poland and where the borders were at that time. But he did end up winning second prize, which they actually called it a second first prize. So the picture is of his 1903 debut in Berlin program. So with going back to Berlin, he didn't have a lot of money. He said that he slept on a park bench like a couple days in a row. He was eating 2 bread rolls a day. He was at the end of his funds and he didn't know what to do. So he tried committing suicide, unfortunately. Fortunately, I think it was a robe belt that he used to try and hang himself. It broke. He was being hounded by debtors, so there were a lot of issues at that time. So this is what he said after he tried to do that. Then, half-consciously, I staggered to the piano and cried myself out in music. Music, my beloved music, the dear companion of all my emotions, who can stir us to fight, who can inflame us in love and passion, and who can soothe our pains and bring peace to our hearts. You are the one who, on that ignominious day, brought me back to life. He found a lot of joy in life after this event, and he considered himself to be the happiest person that he knew. And this was not the only time that he used the piano and music when he was really down. So his concert life in North America. He debuted in 1906, as I said. He toured Mexico in 1919, not 1917 or 18. His autobiographies had a ton of detail. Like his whole life was basically one big party or concert and traveling from this dinner to that concert and things like that. So there weren't a lot of dates in there. Yeah. But basically on his first tour to, no, never mind. So his second tour was in 1921 to America. And by America, I mean the United States. And he went with Paul Kahansky and Carol Simonowski, and you can see them in that picture. Paul is on the left. He's the violinist, and he also did teach at Juilliard in the United States. And then Carol Simonowski is on the right. And he did a third American tour in 1937. This was his first successful tour in America. The first 2 weren't really successful. He didn't make as much money as he thought he would. He was really unknown, so they didn't go. He was also really frustrated with the type of piano he had to play on in his first tour. It was a Nabe piano, and he didn't like it. Among other times, he did play in Boston in 1952 and 1964. These dates are pale in comparison to how many times he actually played in America. So like he had well-known tours where he was going to do a lot of concerts in America, but then there were lots of years where he just came to America for 3 concerts and then went to Mexico for 3 concerts. And it depended on how well he was received in the audiences. So, World War I was kind of a turning point for his career. concerts were more successful and they were in more demand during World War I. And so that obviously was good for him. He also met someone in London who was a great admirer, and that got him to Spain. So, but while he was in London during the war, he served as a military interpreter because he knew 5 languages: German, Polish, Russian, French, and English. So he went to tour Spain in 1916, and they really liked him there. One of the things that, he didn't just love music, he loved arts in like all forms. And whenever he visited a new country, he was very impatient to go see all the cultural sites. And I think that that love for learning about the culture aided him in his interpretations in his music. Because Spain actually said, you are the best interpreter of Spanish music. He was excited to go out and see like flamenco dancers at night and really absorb the idioms of the country. So Spain was a real turning point. He started going there for 3 concerts, and it turned into over 100. So after he toured in Spain for the first time, he then went to South America during World War I again, and he also went there many times afterwards. He had a lot of success there as well, and he met a couple composers down there. He met Heitor Villa-Lobos and Darius Milhaud. Darius Milhaud is a French composer, but he spent a lot of time in Brazil, and that is reflected in the compositions. And Villa-Lobos, I think he was Argentinian, but I'm not sure. Huh? Brazilian, thank you. That was my second guess. So he also played in Africa, Australia, and Asia. Australia and New Zealand, he took a tour. I know his second one was in 1964, so obviously there was a first one before that, and he might have gone back there after that too. He also visited South Africa to play. 1924 is when he first took his first trip to Asia. He started out in Istanbul in Turkey, and then he went to Egypt as well. He played in Alexandria and Cairo. But on this trip, he wanted to take a side trip to Palestine so he could see his people. So he gave a benefit concert, just on a whim, in a plane hangar, because that was the only building they had. And there were 1,000 people in that hangar. And he said it was a very important concert to him because he knew that the people in that audience were really listening with their heart. And there was rain happening and they didn't realize it. Yeah, the rain did not distract them. So his first actual concert was in Israel at 1927, after that initial concert tour. But he went back to Israel many times. He dedicated himself to a lot of concerts in Israel because of World War II. He was very politically supportive of Israel becoming a new state. And he performed with the Israel Philharmonic, and he gave recitals and master classes there. He also played in China, Japan, and Indonesia, and I know he played in Scandinavia too. So there's lots of other places that he played besides what I'm telling you. So these are some well-known artists that he met, because he met so many. César, Ravel, Debussy, Poulenc, Dukas, Scriabin, Villa-Lobos, Darius Milhaud, Jascha Heifetz. He played with him in America when he eventually moved to America. He played with Toscanini and Daniel Barenboim and Leonard Bernstein. Jacques Thibault, Stravinsky, Prokofiev, Diaghilev. He was good friends with Stravinsky and Diaghilev. Obviously, we said he met Grieg and Mascagni. Picasso he knew. He was good friends with Picasso. He was friends with Manuel de Falla and Isaac Albeniz. He also met H.G. Wells. And he met Kodály and Bartók, composers, Hungarian composers. So this is a picture of Toscanini. So his personal life, at 45, he decided to marry. Her name was Aniela Młynarski, and they married in 1932. She was 24. She was a Polish ballerina. He specifically spoke of the Polish women being the most beautiful in the world. And as I said, her father was the conductor of the Warsaw Philharmonia and opera, and he did other things too. I think he was in America for a time. I think he conducted the Philadelphia Orchestra as well. They had 5 children. One of them didn't make it past infancy, so they had 4 adult children. And because of World War II, they moved to the US in 1939, and he became a naturalized citizen in 46. Unfortunately, he lost most of his family in World War II. He had a lot of affairs with women, both before his marriage and during his marriage. There is a famous Brazilian pianist, Luli Oswald, who was an illegitimate child of his, and there was another one, but the facts weren't as strong with the other one, so we don't exactly know. He never divorced Nella, but he did leave her at 90 for a 33-year-old woman named Annabelle Whitestone. If that doesn't speak to you, the vitality of this man, I don't know what does. Annabelle Whitestone, I believe, was his secretary. So he died in Geneva, Switzerland with her. So his personality. The picture says it. He could be a real goof. He was very extroverted. Like, he talks about that. Extremely extroverted person. And that really aided his career. Because, even, today, as a musician, the people you know, that gets you into playing gigs. And so when you're an extrovert knowing tons of people, tons of aristocratic people with money that are going to throw money at you to have some concerts, that really aided him. He was a very sensitive and emotional person, and that's something that, every good musician has to have. He was known for being an amusing storyteller and an impersonator. He talked all the time about at parties how he would, tell his funny stories to entertain the people that he was with. He had a lot of energy. Again, he had a massive appetite for the arts, spanning his whole life, not just music, but books. He was literature in general, he was obsessed with. Paintings, sculpture, dancing, travel, food, wine, and yes, women were a part of that. I think someone made a funny joke about him saying, oh, when you were young, you loved wine, women, and something else I don't recall. And he's like, nope, you're wrong. 90% of the time, women was on my mind. Women were on my mind. Yeah. So, again, he was very impatient to visit museums and sites in new countries, and that didn't work out for him the first time he went to Italy. He experienced some not so kosher stuff. So his artistic personality, he was really known for having a great tone on the piano, which is maybe something you don't really think of, because even I, as a musician, I don't really think of this being a percussion instrument, but that's really what it is. And it seems odd to me that you do have control over the tone on a piano, but he was known for having a great tone on the piano. He credits Emmy Destine, who was a singer that he knew early in his life. He said he cried at the quality of her voice in some of her concerts. And even there's a interview on YouTube of Rubinstein at 90, and he was still credited her for his tone on the piano. He wasn't exactly sure how he did that, but he did. He was very expressive. He loved phrasing. He would say things like, you know, that was a great technical performance. Where's the music? Stuff like that. If there was no phrasing, it wasn't music to him. And that's part of the reason why, that's where him and Vladimir Horowitz kind of differed. Horowitz was great at technicality, and that was Rubinstein's weakness. And they did meet each other like around the time that he was 40, and they were friends. But knowing Vladimir, he started to feel really poor about his laziness in practicing and his technical facility. So he was a great interpreter. Obviously, we talked about how Spain thought he was the greatest interpreter, and he was a really good interpreter for Chopin. Again, it was because he really knew how to recognize those subtle differences in like idioms of folk music or language or things like that of each different culture. He approached music with a clear concept of structure and a composer's emotional attention. That's what he said he really looked at music with, those two lenses he used. Yes, he did neglect the difficulty of certain passages. What he would do is just kind of gloss over it and use more pedals, so you kind of muddied it up a little bit. Yeah. So he was very enthusiastic and reactive. He loved crowds. Like he said, he talked about an electricity or a current in the air in his recitals. And he really used that for his own benefit in playing. He said, the bigger the hall and the larger the audience, the more self-control and confidence he had. That's the opposite of a lot of people. This is a quote of his: "At every concert I leave a lot to the moment. I must have the unexpected, the unforeseen. I want to risk, to dare. I want to be surprised by what comes out. I want to enjoy it more than the audience. That way the musician can bloom anew. It's like making love. The act is always the same, but each time it's different." So he called it musical camouflage, how he could kind of cover up the fact that he wasn't playing something technically right with, you know, the pedals and things that I just described. And yeah, so he met Horowitz, I believe, around the time he was 40, and after meeting him, he really was at a low with self-confidence because he could hear that Horowitz's his technicality was great. So he got married when he was 45, and it was then when he started practicing like 6, 8, 10 hours a day. I've seen some accounts say 6, 8, or 9. I've seen other accounts say 12 to 14. Like 6, 8, and 9, that is something that you would kind of expect to hear a pianist be practicing every day. So for him to get away and have such a good career without doing that, it's kind of unimaginable. So when people would come up to him and say, "You are the greatest pianist," he didn't like that. He would get angry at that because he thought nothing in art can be the best. It's only different. So he was friends with Stravinsky. He met Stravinsky in London, and they argued over the piano as an instrument. Stravinsky said it's nothing more than a percussion instrument. You can't make it sound better. And obviously Rubinstein really disagreed with that. One thing that really struck me, and I'm going to try and move quickly now, Rubinstein was such a great interpreter of the composer's intentions, and it really showed with Stravinsky in his Rite of Spring. So that when the Rite of Spring premiered, There were riots. People hated it because it was so different from what normal music sounded like at that time. And Rubinstein also didn't really like it the first time he heard it, but then he was able to look at the score and he was able to have a conversation with Stravinsky. Rubinstein actually guessed correctly what Stravinsky was thinking, what he was trying to evoke in that piece of music. Basically, he was trying to evoke the sound of evolution at the birth of nature instead of just trying to illustrate tribal practices, which is what most people think it's about. Stravinsky did write some pieces for Rubinstein. So he was friends with Picasso too. I was friends with him before he was Picasso and I was Rubinstein. So there's a couple of pictures of Picasso and Rubinstein, and then Picasso also drew some, portraits of sketches of Rubinstein's face. So other people he met. So on the left, we've got Gregory Peck. In the middle, we've got Einstein, and on the right, we've got Bernstein. And this is a picture of him playing at Boston Symphony Hall. Now, I'm pretty sure the piano that we're looking at there is not this one, because this was his favorite practice piano. But who knows? So, life accomplishments, he made more than 200 recordings. He recorded essentially all of Chopin's works and all of Beethoven's concertos. He was a recitalist, a concert soloist, and a chamber pianist. He was awarded the United States Medal of Freedom in 1976. His last performance was in London at Wigmore Hall in 1976 at 89 years old. He received a Kennedy Center honors in 1978 from Jimmy Carter, which is this picture. And Fred Astaire and Marian Anderson are also in that picture. And Richard Rodgers. And he performed more than 6,000 times in his life. So I have at least one video I really want to share with you guys.
That's how it should sound, more or less. But this is what it is.
That's how it should have sounded.
He was there, the same pile there, but here, not one right note. There was not one single thing that was really there. Look.
So the second time he played it, he wasn't playing any right notes in the right hand, but it sounded like still pretty good. That's how he played it earlier in his life. Okay, I've got two more like minute 30 videos.
Als Arthur Rubinstein sein erstes Konzert
Again, he's improvising. Okay, one more. This is a very typical piece that he played a lot.
Als Arthur Rubinstein sein erstes Konzert nach dem Kriege in seiner polnischen Heimat gegeben hatte, fanden die Kritiker keine Worte. Die Sprache würde nicht ausreichen, sein Klavierspiel zu beschreiben.
Wollen Sie das bitte fotografieren sehen sollen? Mein eigener Flug. Ich bin ganz seriös. Ist das? Soll das drin sein? Nein, das wird nicht stören.
So this is an encore that he's doing at the end of a concert. Okay, questions?